Welcome to 12 Hours in the Future with Maria Sanchir. Today's guest has directed Disney animated classic The Lion King, Stuart Little, Mr. Peabody and Sherman, and Forbidden Kingdom. His upcoming animation Paws of Fury will be in theaters July 15th. I can't believe that I am actually saying this. This is Rob Minkoff. Thank you so much for doing this. This is an absolute honor to speak to you today.
Well, thank you so much. It's good to be here. It's very nice to meet you, and looking forward to our talk.
Thank you so much. Before we begin, I have to say, and I'm sure everybody's going to agree with me, thank you for Lion King. Oh my God, this is like, I have never met a person who never liked it.
Wow, thank you.
And I met a lot of people who don't like my choices of films. And
thank you very much.
Yeah, it's absolute. Like, everybody love it. It's like, kudos to you. Thank you so much. I want to begin with character design.
Sure.
You have designed Ursula, right? I want to thank you for that as well.
Sure.
And if you go online, you can see a lot of character arts for Ursula. There's many different ones. There's one with butterfly wings, the thin one with like dandelion-like hair, different ones. So I wanted to ask what kind of process is to choose, like how
Sure.
it's decided.
Interesting. In the case of The Little Mermaid, they brought me onto the project. The directors brought me on to do character designs. And when you're working in that early phase, you know, it's an opportunity to explore different ideas and have the chance to imagine, you know, other things. The directors also happen to be the writers of the script, and their description of Ursula was quite different than the character that ended up on the screen. And so, you know, when we talk about the fact that I designed the character, there was obviously many other people making contributions. Right. But I think what I did was I presented a concept for a very different personality. And the one I had suggested is really the character that Ursula became. Right. But in my first design, my first drawing, it was not exactly the Ursula that we know, because later through the process, there was another design that had been done, very different from what I had suggested, that incorporated the octopus legs, the octopus, the idea of combining her with an octopus. So that, obviously that's a major contribution to the design of the character. But again, it was this characterization that I suggested, which was inspired by an actor who is known as Divine. Divine is the name of the actor. And it was sort of a man who dressed as a woman. In a series of movies by John Waters, who's a famous independent film director from the 70s and the 80s. You know, so John Waters worked with this actress or actor, I don't know what pronoun to use now, but, you know, but the name is Divine. And so the design that I had done was sort of like, what if the character Ursula was more like this kind of a man dressed as a woman?
Right.
And so, in fact, when we did the early test of the character, which I actually did the very beginning, the very first animation of the character I did, I actually brought in a friend of mine who was an actor from Cal Arts, where I went to school. Right. And he actually dressed the part and acted the part on film. So it was actually a man doing the live action reference. And it was actually recorded. So there's video somewhere in the world that exists of that session, but no one has actually seen it. So, and that's not really much talked about either, that the character is this kind of almost drag queen kind of character.
Right. Yeah, with the...
I know that wasn't exactly the question you asked me. You asked me about selecting, but I suppose the idea of choosing, you know, the design, it's really it becomes the responsibility of the directors, although, you know, there are many voices in the production of an animated film. So, but it's really the director's role and the director's job to kind of guide the creative process among all the different artists that work on it. So, so it was really John Musker and Ron Clements, who were the directors, who had to make the choices. So I was a character designer, and I just, made suggestions, of what it could be. And then it was really left to them to make the decisions.
Yeah, for those who don't know, Little Mermaid marks the renaissance of the Disney animation. Just
Sure.
FYI.
Yeah, just FYI.
Lightly. Yeah, just FYI.
Yeah.
Yeah, not a biggie. I know that when you were brought in for The Lion King, you basically rewrote the whole thing with the team, right? Yeah. And I know that you rewrote the characters of Timon and Pumbaa and brought in the return of Mufasa's spirit.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that? Like, what was the process?
Sure. Well, again, Lion King was already in development at Disney. And the original concept, which was suggested by the person who was in charge of development at the time, a guy named Charlie Fink, he pitched this idea of doing Bambi in Africa. That was his pitch, right? Because Bambi was, very, classic Disney film, which everyone knew and loved, but it was really focusing on the animal kingdom, the animals in the animal world, and trying to find the story in a kind of a natural setting. And so the idea was, could we do the same thing or something similar in Africa with African animals and lions in particular? And the story I heard was Charlie pitched this idea to Michael Eisner, who was running the studio. And Michael Eisner says, well, that's fine if we can figure out how the lions don't eat Bambi. So
good point.
That was just the humble beginnings of the project. So it was an idea to do a story about a lion, and then it evolved into a story of a lion growing up. But when I got involved in the project, I felt that one of the things that was missing from the film was a bit of Disney magic. Right. Because it was in a way, Bambi is also, obviously Bambi's a classic film, but Bambi very much deals with the real world, right? It's the real world of animals.
The loss.
And so, it was a bit too, in the original kind of version of the story, it was a little bit, I would describe it as dry. It was a very, in a way, one-dimensional. So many things that were in that story carried over into the film that we made, but some of the big things that were added, as you mentioned, the idea of Mufasa's ghost coming back to talk to Simba, that wasn't contemplated. Another major story movement that wasn't in the original was that Simba would be chased away by the hyenas and go out to the wastelands, or go out to be banished from Pride Rock in a sense. So going out, becoming an outcast, and that was again hand in hand with the idea of making Timon and Pumbaa very different characters, because in the original version, Timon and Pumbaa were childhood friends of Simba and Nala. And so they were incorporated into the story and the characters from the very beginning. They were around Pride Rock, and in fact, they all went to, in a sequence that was abandoned or changed, they went to the watering hole together with Simba and Nala and Timon and Pumbaa as children. And then when we said, the film needed to be more of a epic feeling, more of a almost biblical film, and the kind of references we were using were, Joseph, which is a Bible story, or the Ten Commandments even, where Moses goes out and wanders in the desert, and then of course, it talks to God, and then comes back to free the people, the Israelites. In a way, that's kind of what we were trying to evoke in The Lion King, was something on that scale, and with those kind of deeper spiritual elements. And so Rafiki became a different character in this new version. Rafiki was again a very serious character. Who was kind of an advisor to Mufasa, almost like a political advisor, and again was very much incorporated into the characters of Pride Rock. But when we made these changes, we said, Rafiki could be more of a spiritual character. He could be more of a shaman, witch doctor character, rather than a politician. He was a bringing again into the storytelling a kind of a spiritual element that became the kind of the cornerstone of what the story, or the meaning of the story eventually became.
Right. Okay. I have a funny question. What's Scar's name?
What is his name? You mean his
Yeah.
is Scar his
Scar is
nickname? Is
the
that what you're saying?
nickname, right? Yeah. What is his real action? Do you know?
Uh, I don't know. I'm not sure if we ever had it
Okay.
considered. I mean, we were aware of the fact that his name was kind of like the affectation of having the scar on his face. But I don't know if since then somebody may have come up with a
Yeah, because I saw your reaction to Honest trailers.
yeah.
It was, yeah, because, like not a lot of directors do that. It's considered brave.
Oh, really?
Apparently. Yeah, because, people don't really like that. And I think the Russos did that and you did that.
Okay.
Yeah, and I wanted to just say your impression of James Earl Jones is impeccable.
Thank you.
It was great.
I don't know. I'm sure I've told this story before, but I would record some of the dialogue. Many of the animators and the other story artists and etc. The ones that are comfortable will do the dialogue, the scratch dialogue. So we record the dialogue first before the actors.
Which will sound like?
What do you mean? And will sound like? So so Mufasa was one of the characters that I did. So I I really have to get into my deep voice. Mufasa, Simba. Simba.
Oh my God.
Have you forgotten me? You have forgotten who you are, and so forgotten me. So I'm not sure how that sounds, but
God, I had just chills.
so I would do that, and so I think I did it. There was a sequence that we had done late in the process, and we had to bring James Earl Jones in to record the dialogue. And so when we showed it to him, we showed him the sequence, and we played the line of dialogue that I had done. We said, okay, we need to do this line. And he said, well, what's wrong with that? And I said, because it's not you, it's me. He would go, oh, okay. Anyway,
It was that good then.
it was okay. Yeah, I guess
good.
it was okay. It was okay. I mean, he's got such an amazing voice. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. So I want to also ask about the pitch, the time from pitch to until it was made. So you pitched it to Jeffrey Katzenberg.
Yeah. So, so like I said, it was already in development. But then we did a session over a couple of days where we kind of refashioned the story. And they're it was a very small group of people, but obviously super talented. The directors of Beauty and the Beast, Kirk Wise and Gary Trousdale, were actually brought in to kind of contribute. Roger Allers, who was my directing partner, was also, of course, there. And Brenda Chapman, who was our head of story, was also there. So I think it was really us five. Don Hahn, who is the producer, came and went from that session. But it was really in those few days that we refashioned the story. And then we had a big presentation of that new version of the story. And it was really for the collective group. So it was, of course, Jeffrey Katzenberg was there, Peter Schneider, Tom Schumacher, who were running animation at the time. And Tom was also a producer of Lion King at the time, even though he started as the producer, but then he got promoted to a more senior role, kind of overseeing everything. And Don Hahn became the kind of daily producer on the picture. But then, of course, also Michael Eisner, who was, kind of the big boss of the studio, was also there. So it was really everybody. And Roy Disney, can't forget Roy Disney Jr.
Yeah.
Roy Disney was there. And then there was a gallery of other people in that pitch as well. So I think Roger and I got up in front of the group and went through the story, the new revised movie.
Mm-hmm. And how long did it take from that moment on until the premiere?
Probably around two years.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Were you involved much in the character design because of your background?
Yes. I mean, a lot of exploration had been done, but we hadn't made, the choices about the characters had not yet been made, and the refinement of the characters had not been done either. But, for instance, there was drawings. Chris Sanders, who is a brilliant designer, brilliant director, brilliant, all-around guy, Chris was working as a production designer on the film early on. And so he had done a lot of designs and drawings that were kind of the beginning of the inspirations. Chris has a very unique style, very personal style, which shows up later in Lilo and Stitch, which they made it very much. Chris was the director, of course, and they made it very much in his, they really carried out his personal style, which was very unusual at the time at Disney, or it's just in generally unusual because Disney had become a kind of a place that had a sort of a studio style. So things were designed within the kind of framework of what was typical at Disney, but Chris has a very unique voice. So anyway, so many of his designs were in his own style, but of course they evolved and to the characters that we know. Again, like I said, Timon and Pumbaa completely changed who they were. We didn't really even have the hyenas as characters at all in the early version of the story. There's a funny story there. We were trying to figure out who the characters, the personalities were going to be of the hyenas. And Gary Trousdale, who I said, was working with us in the development, the story development, was also a storyboard artist. And he did a kind of a pass of the hyenas as Cheech and Chong, the funny sort of stoner comedians that we all grew up loving. And so, of course, we actually managed to get Cheech Marin to be one of the hyenas. But at the time, Cheech and Chong were not working together. I don't think they were friends at the time. But one day, Peter Schneider walked into a meeting after lunch and said, "I just wanted to ask if there's a role in the movie for Whoopi Goldberg."
Right.
And we were like, "What?" And it was like, "Why are you asking? That's a crazy question." And he said, well, apparently Whoopi had lunch with Elton John and she heard about the movie and she wants to be in it.
Oh, okay.
And so we sat down and we were like, well, what could she be? And we're like, well, I guess, she could be Zazu, possibly. She could be Zazu. But, I don't know if we had Rowan Atkinson at the time.
That would have been really different film.
Totally different. We said she could be Zazu. I'm not sure if we thought she could be Rafiki, but that would have been actually a good casting, interesting idea.
Right.
But then we said, well, I said, well, we have Cheech, but we don't have Chong. Maybe Whoopi would do it. Maybe it would be Cheech and Whoopi. And we're like, I don't know if she'll accept the role, but let's offer it to her and hopefully she will. And she did. She took the role and she was terrific.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, of course.
So it's a lot, when you're making a film, there is a lot. It's a process, right? It evolves over time. All those decisions aren't made at one time. They're made over a series of weeks and months. Or sometimes early in the development, sometimes in the middle of production. Things can change. We had one screening when we hired Nathan Lane and Ernie Sabella to play Timon and Pumbaa. It was because they had come in and did an audition. Actually, they were auditioning for the hyenas.
Oh.
And so we heard the tape of one of the scenes that they had done, which was a scene of the two of them or the three of them waiting to start the stampede. And that scene is in the film currently. So the dialogue was already written and Nathan and Ernie did it. And they were so funny and so likable as characters that the light bulb went off. You said, oh my God, what about them as Timon and Pumbaa? Because they're so fun and so, they have so much great energy and they're so funny together. And so we made the offer to them and we recorded them and cut the first scenes together with the characters. And the first version of whatever scene we presented just fell flat. And the jokes didn't really play. And, Nathan was coming across well, but Ernie didn't really, probably because of the material, or, just whatever we had done, we hadn't really kind of made it funny enough, kind of fell flat. And so it was Jeffrey who saw it and he said, you have to replace the actor, right? You have to get rid of Ernie. And we're like, oh my God, no, no. They're so great together. And I literally, this is a true story. I ran outside to Peter Schneider's car before he left the studio. And I said, Peter, you have to give us one more chance. I said, you've got to give us one more chance. They're great together and they're going to be great in the movie. And I don't want to recast him until, you give us one more chance. And Peter said, okay, fine. You have one more chance. And so the next time we did a presentation of a screening, and we had rewritten the material and re-storyboarded the material, recut it together, and showed it, and it really came alive, and it really worked. And then we were fine. And then and then that's who the characters became.
Right. Wow. Amazing story. Thank you for sharing that. Also heard you once said that if you had a chance, you would go back and to do it again, The Lion King. You will do it differently. I wanted to ask, what would be the major thing that you would change?
Well, it's interesting when they did the remake, the sort of the live action, they call it live action remake. I got a chance. I actually met with Jon Favreau about it, and we talked at length, kind of before they really, early in their production.
Right.
And one of the things I had suggested to him, I heard that he almost did. But then when I saw the film finally, I realized he hadn't done it, which is to use one of the songs that they used in the Broadway show called He Lives in You, which was written by Mark Menchina and Lebo M. Lebo had come in to work with us as a singer,
right,
because he and Hans Zimmer had worked together on another movie called The Power of One, which was set in South Africa. And it was really the reason we hired Hans. But Lebo and Mark Menchina, who was our arranger for all of the songs and wrote some of the score working for Hans, had written this song together because they were inspired by the story. And it was really, the song was about Mufasa, and Mufasa singing this song called He Lives in You, which is a line from the film that Rafiki says to Simba later in the film when Simba sees the reflection of Mufasa in the water. Rafiki says, "He lives in you." And so they wrote a song called He Lives in You. And I although I don't really remember this, Mark tells me that they actually showed the song to us during production and presented it to us as a song that maybe we could use in the film. And the truth was, had we, I have no reason not to believe him, but, I don't think that it was even conceivable at that time that anything not written by Elton John was going to get in the movie.
Right.
It just wasn't a practical possibility that would happen, which is why I think I don't remember it, because I think when I heard it, it was a little bit like, there's nothing we're going to be able to do to put this song in the movie.
Right.
Just because it's very complicated. Elton John is the songwriter, and Tim Rice, and it's just, and Mark was even very early. He's had a big career since then, but he was working at the time. He was really working for Hans Zimmer, so he didn't even have that kind of reputation yet, and neither did Lebo. So it was very difficult to imagine convincing anybody to do it. But then when I finally saw it, they actually used it in the Broadway show because Julie Taymor had listened to this album of material that was done after the movie came out called Rhythm of the Pride Lands. And because the movie was successful, they decided to put out a new piece of musical material, which Lebo and Mark worked on together. And she heard that song and she fell in love with it. And so she used it in the Broadway show. And it's incredibly powerful and works so well in the Broadway show. And so when I met with John, I said, John, that one of the things that I wish we could have done over again is use that song, because it's such a fantastic and powerful song. And I think that he almost put it in the film, but then at the last minute, they decided to put in Beyonce instead.
Right. Yeah. Well, okay. Yeah, because I really wanted to ask this, because I heard you saying that in another interview that you would do it differently. So I was like, this is really interesting. So I wanted to ask about the wolf totem.
Yep.
I read an article where it says that you were working on it as a animation. Because it's very interesting, because I'm obviously from Mongolia, and it's about wolves in Mongolia, right?
Yes.
Have you seen the movie, like Jean-Jacques Anna's? And is it like the same adaptation of the same book?
Well,
is it still happening?
Great question. It's a great question. So when I was first brought the project, it was by a producer named Zhang Zhao, who sadly has passed away.
Oh, no.
Since then. he ran a company called LaVision in China, and he made a deal for the animation rights of the book. So it was of that book. He brought the project to me, and he said, "Are you interested in making, turning the book into an animated film?"
Mm-hmm.
And I had not yet read the book.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, let me read the book and let me, think about it and talk to you. So I read the book. And when I came back to him, I said, it's a beautiful book, but I said, they're making a movie already of the book, right? Jean-Jacques Hano was in production at the time. It wasn't released yet. Mm-hmm. And I said, they're making a movie of the book, and I don't know exactly what they're going to do with the movie, but I sort of felt that any version that we would want to do as an animation version should really take the point of view of the wolves.
Right.
Because animation can allow you to do that, right? I mean, the wolves can be more characters in the storytelling, and of course they can talk. They could talk. In an animated world, in an animation movie, you sort of expect the animals to do that. Obviously, we did in Lion King. So I came back after reading the book, and I said, obviously, I first want to wait to see the film, to see what they did with the film. And then the film did come out, and I did see the film, and I thought it was a beautiful film. But I said, I really want to do something inspired by the story and inspired by the world. So it developed very much different from the book. And in fact, it was set in a more ancient time, because the book is set in a much more modern time and setting. And so I thought maybe we should go back to more of an ancient Mongolia to talk about how the wolf became the totem animal. Right. Mm-hmm. So that was really how it developed, as a story.
Oh, so you're still working on it? It's still happening?
Well, I'm, in a sense, yes.
Okay. Very vague. Okay. Because I've seen a couple of familiar faces in the film, like a couple of Mongolian actors were there. Yeah.
In the Jean-Jacques Hano film.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, oh, okay.
Well, there's been a lot of, so what happened is the producer that I mentioned to you, Zhang Zhao, who had the rights, I mentioned that he passed, and the company that he ran was also bought by another company. So it's gotten a bit more complicated in terms of, so I'm
the business side of it.
There's been obviously a lot of things going on, like COVID, obviously, which has been very disruptive.
Yeah, because the article was like 2017 article or something like that when I read it.
Exactly.
It's a Hollywood Reporter. This is the end of the first part of my conversation with director Rob Minkoff. The second part will follow.
12 Hours in the Future is produced by Jim Carney and Maria Sanchir, with technical help from Daryl Mandiola. Special thanks to Professor Tom O'Hanlon, Dean James Mann, Professor Stephanie Stowe, Ed Stone, and Magda Soto. The executive producer and host of 12 Hours in the Future is Maria Sanchir. 12 Hours in the Future with Maria Sanchir is a series of conversations recorded with the resources of Lehman College, City University of New York. You can find us everywhere podcasts are available, and on YouTube. This show is protected under international copyright and may not be recorded or retransmitted without written consent. Until next time, when we see you 12 hours in the future.